There's a little part of his story that he sometimes tells, and I always find it very illustrative of something. So, honey, I hope you don't mind if I just add that little part. He mentioned a man who had passed away. His name was Bob Worrell. And the night before Al had and I felt that presence in the room, Bob had come to the hospital and told him that, a lot of people are praying for you, but you have to pray for yourself. And Al did pray, and the way he illustrated the prayer was, sometimes when you pray, you feel they reach the ceiling and bounce back down. You really don't feel that you've communicated. He said, because Al was a member of the choir, he said, when I'm up there and the microphone's not on, my voice isn't projecting. But when the microphone is on, then you can hear your voice and you know that other people can hear you. And he says, that was his experience with that prayer that night before that presence, was that the prayers of the people were the amplification of his prayer up to heaven. And I thought that was so true. When we pray and when you pray for others, God, you are the amplifiers of God's will and his prayer. I thought that was pretty interesting. See, how are we doing on time? Okay, we have some time. So I thought I would tell you just a couple of chapters of the book. As you'll read in the first part, I had attended a woman's retreat, and you'll read about that in the book. So when I got home from the retreat, and actually I told my husband about my experiences, and I was surprised. On Tuesday, I got a call from my mother. In New Jersey, and I was living in California. My mother never called on the weekdays. She always calls on the weekends, when back then it was cheaper to call on the weekends. And so I was really surprised at her call. And almost one of the first things that she said was, Maria, have you ever tried to find your father? Well, that kind of flabbergasted me, because we had not talked about my father in decades. And so I said, well, I may have looked in the phone book when I came out here, but no, I haven't. She says, well, I know he's alive and I want you to contact him. I said, oh, he's probably dead by now. She said, no, he's alive. I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, well, because this friend of mine told me, and my mother told me, my father's name again, and that he was married to a woman by the name of Marie, and that he had one son, but he never had any other children. And I said, okay, well, have your friend give me an address, and I'll call. I'll make an attempt. She goes, no, my friend is dead. I said, well, maybe he's dead too. She says, no, he's not. Now I want you to try to contact him. And then she told me the reason. She suffered a lot with heart attacks. And most recently, she was in the hospital with a heart attack, and there were tubes coming out of her, and she was on monitors. And she told me that she had a dream that my father was in it, and that's why she wanted to contact me, and thoughts of me had come to her mind and plagued her. And boy, when she said that, that even after all these years, she still considered me a plague, that really touched me, or really hurt me. So she said, now it's my dying wish that you try and contact him. I want you to promise me that. Well, I guess I could promise to try, and I think if your mother put it that way to you, you would have to promise that too. But I didn't know how I was going to do it. Well, she said, well, he's living in Los Angeles. And I said, oh, okay, Mother, in case you didn't know it, it's a couple of million other people living there. And so I went to bed that night, and when I woke up in the morning, boom, this thought was in my mind. And maybe you've had that experience where you're not thinking particularly of anything, and then this thought comes into your mind, and you know it's not your thought. You know that God put it there. And wow, that sounded like a good idea. And I said, okay, I'll try that. So the next day, or that morning, I got into our real estate office, and my husband and the other agents were out on a tour seeing the new listings. It probably was a Wednesday. And so I thought, okay, so the idea was, or the thought was, to call my local title company and ask for the customer service number of the title company in Los Angeles. Title companies are very accommodating to realtors. So I picked up the phone and then dialed the local number. 15 minutes, took about 15 seconds, and I got the number of the title company in Los Angeles, and so I dialed that, and I asked for customer service, and I said, do you show any residence properties owned by a Thomas Emanuel? And they said, let me check. Doing the computer, he says, yeah, here it is, and gave me the address, so I wrote it down. And I said, well, do you have any other listings for Thomas Emanuel? No, this is the only one. I said, well, how long has that person owned that property? And he said, oh, long time, over 25 years. So this goes back before we were even on the computer data. So I thought, well, must be an older person then, didn't just buy that house. So I said, thank you very much, and I hung up the phone. And I looked down at this piece of paper, Thomas Emanuel, and an address. I said, this doesn't happen this way. I'm supposed to hire an investigator. I'm supposed to pay money, spend a lot of time looking. This was less than 3 minutes. And I said, Lord, this doesn't happen like this unless you are doing it. And it was like the Holy Spirit was saying, yeah, go ahead, write a letter. I thought, okay. So I took out a piece of blank paper and I began to write a letter. I said, dear Mr. Emanuel, for all my life I've wanted to meet someone by your name. The man that I'm looking for is, and I gave a few facts, and then I said a little bit about myself, where I was born, and a little bit about my life. And I thought, well, if he is the one, then he'll be able to connect the dots and know who I am or who it is that's writing to him. So I ended the letter with, if you're not the one, just return this letter in the enclosed self-addressed envelope, and then I'll know what to do next. And so I sealed up the envelope, walked out to the reception area. The postman just happened to be there, so I handed him the letter, and he was off. And then I went back to my desk, and it was back to real estate business as usual. Well, my husband and the agents came back a little while later, and I said, I told him what happened. I made these calls, I got this address, and I wrote this letter, and I had made a copy of it. And so he's reading the letter, and he says, you did this? You did what? And he's reading, and he says, you did this without asking me or discussing this with me? And I said, yeah, I did. He says, you don't know what you have done, do you? I said, what do you mean? He said, this man has never contacted you in 45 years, and he's going to get this letter. What do you expect him to do? I said, well, he could just send it back. And my husband said, do you really think he could do that if he's your father? And I said, well, maybe it's not even him. So I called the title company again, and I asked if there was a wife's name on the record. And sure enough, it was Marie. Then I realized, oh my gosh, this is really him. I really did write this letter. I was mortified because it's true. I hadn't given no thought at all to writing it. I didn't know, I had no expectations. I didn't know if he was sick, or I didn't know what his reaction was going to be. I didn't know if it'd make him angry. Oh, boy, it was so good in God's timing that we were on a vacation. We left immediately on a week's vacation because I could not have worked. I could not have thought. I mean, it was the most dread. If there was any way I could have gotten that letter back, if it was sitting on the desk at the receptions, in the reception area, I would have gotten it, and I probably would have torn it up, chickened out. But I couldn't. The letter was gone. And things during the vacation were coming back to my mind, and it was this sinking dread feeling of not knowing what was going to happen next. I realized that I had pulled the trigger. Things were set in motion already, and I had no control over what was going to happen. I had just taken a huge, huge risk. And that's where I'm going to leave you, so that you'll want to buy my book and find out what happens next. I guarantee you, you will enjoy reading it, and I know you'll be blessed and you'll want to share it with other people. In fact, the book normally retails for $15, but today I'm going to give you my author's discount of 20%, so they're $12, and I made a cute little purse, a thing that has little candies in it as a thank you note for coming here and allowing me to share with you. And in closing, I wanted to read something to you that I transcribed from an internet video, because I was so touched by it. It kind of represents the father that all of us would love to have. And it's called, I call it Father of the Bride. I'm going to read it to you because his words are so precious. The bride has already come down the aisle, and now it's the father of the bride's time to present his daughter to her future husband, Philip. So he says, "Philip, I want to tell you a story, and like all good stories, it goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a father, and in case you can't figure it out, that's me. This father had a wonderful little boy. He was very happy. And then one day, he found out his wife was going to have another baby. So he prayed, 'Lord, if it's your will, make her a little girl.' And he did. I was the first one to hold her in my arms, and I said, 'Lord, make her like her mother.' And he did. She was loving and giving and kind and so good. But then I realized I was getting left out. And so I said, 'Lord, make her like me.' And he did. She could drive a truck and a tractor. She could load hay and chew tobacco. Do you realize what you're getting?" When he talks to the groom, shakes his head. But at the same time, she was opinionated, emotional, and hard-headed. And so I said, "Lord, that's enough of that. Make her like you." And he did. He gave her the desire to serve people. She loves people. She gives her life to being a nurse. She's even brought people back from the death. And she's held the hand of people who took their last breath. He gave her a heart for missions. And she trekked all over the world. She pushed canoes up swollen rivers, laid on the floor as bullets whizzed by so she could tell people about Jesus. But still, something was missing. So I said, "Lord, make her happy." And she met you. See that look on her face? I never saw that until she met you. And I'm grateful for that. Today, I am giving you the best that I have to give. I just want you to know, before I do, how hard me and God have worked on her to get her ready. So Philip, as I give her to you, I don't think you'll mind if I give you just one more word of advice. Me and God have worked very hard, so don't screw it up.
It's good.